Okay, today we will talk about strategies and how we can develop strategies. And in strategy, and especially here in this session where we are talking about more overall strategies, we have two kinds of strategies, or we could say levels. And we talk about business level and we talk about the corporate level. Now, both levels use results from our SWOT analysis, but they use them kind of in a different way. The business level, let's try to take a bit look at this. This is something that we develop directly from our analysis of the environment, and we also develop them directly from the analysis of the resources. So what it means is, when we look at this next slide here that we are, I hope, quite familiar with right now, is that we have our analysis part when we're talking about strategy, and we have our strategy part where we are today, and then we have, of course, the strategy implementation. But going down to look at these environment-based options, as you can see this arrow here, it points directly to the environment, meaning that the environment-based options are created based on the analysis that we had from our environmental analysis, and thereby also using our opportunities and the threats that we have found. The same goes for this one down here, the resource-based options. They are developed based upon our analysis of resources. So in this case here, we know that the SWOT is used to summarize, and we have strengths and weaknesses, and we have opportunities and threats. We have talked about that before, but of course, both is about getting the idea about the strategic position of the company right now. So it is about the specific company. And later today, we'll also talk about strategic business units. And the specific company is what we would call a strategic business unit, or an SBU. And normally when we do a SWOT, we try to keep the points short and well argued, and only to concentrate on key issues, so no long list, and also to use key factors for success as a guide to understand what is important in the SWOT. So when we are looking into what we are going to focus at, then we have the SWOT analysis for the business, the individual company, and of course we look into the elements of our purpose of the company. And then when we're looking at this next slide here, we have the environment-based strategic options. And here you can see that Lynch is talking about three different kinds of strategies: generic strategies, market options, and expansion method. I would like to say right now that the expansion methods, they are not in that sense real strategies based on the marketplace. They are more ideas about how can we go about expanding to a new market, for example. But we'll see that when we get to it. But for now, just hang on to generic strategies and market options. Those are the strategies that we develop directly based upon our environment. And looking at the other part, the resource part, as we can see here, Lynch suggests us to say, okay, if we have these resources, how can we use the value chain for identifying specific strategies? What about a specific resource-based view and cost reductions? So again, it's a very systematic way of identifying specific strategies based on the environment and based on our resources. And then, of course, when we have finalized our different identification strategies, or different strategies that we would like to have, then we have these major options, as we would call them. So we would take all the options from the environment-based, For example, some generic strategies, some option strategies. We take some strategies from the value chain, from maybe cost reduction, and we pool them together into one box. And then we need to make a choice. And therefore, we have this next section, and we will deal with that later. But this is where we are choosing between those different options. Because right now, imagine that we have a generic strategy, and we have a resource-based strategy from the value chain. Which one should we use? Or could we use both? And what are the criteria that we need to use in order to choose? These are also quite big questions and important questions, but they will come after we have identified what different kind of strategies might we find simply by looking at the environment and the resources. So let's get started, and more specifically, let's get started with the environment-based strategic options. And as I mentioned before, it is simply you have to think of it as a systematic way to develop strategies based upon our environmental situation. So the first one we will look at is Michael Porter's generic strategies. And what Porter did was that he investigated the marketplace, and he was interested in figuring out how is it that companies, they compete. And we need to remember that this research took place in the late 70s and 80s in the US. And of course, there might be some biases, but there are still pretty good ideas to pick up from this research that Porter did. So one of the major results was that he found that companies that are quite successful, they tend to have either a very broad target. That means that they have quite a wide-ranging approach across much of the marketplace, or they have a more narrow target. It means that they are aimed at more like a niche in the marketplace. So that was his observation, that successful companies, they did either go for a broad target or they did go for a narrow target. There wasn't something, as he would say, in between or stuck in the middle. So the next part is that when he is going to understand what do these companies do when they have a broad target, then he said, okay, we need to figure out how is it that they are competing. So if we have a company with a very broad target, let's take an example here. It could be, again, Vestas. It could be Coca-Cola, some of the brand names that we know. If we have Coca-Cola, they have quite a very broad target. They're going really wide out into the market. And then we would have to ask ourselves, if they do that, if they really reach out to basically everybody and all different kinds of customers in the marketplace, how do they compete then? And then his idea was that when we are looking at how they compete, his research showed him that either a company could follow a cost leadership strategy, means that they would go to have the lowest cost in the industry and also offer low prices to their customers. So if we look at Coca-Cola and we agree they have a broad target, is that what they are doing? Do they go for having a low cost leadership? No, they are not. On the contrary, they would rather try to differentiate themselves, and they would like to have their distinctive product, and they would also like to charge a higher price. So his research basically showed us that a company with a broad target has a can have a competitive advantage within cost, and thereby survive and be the best within that particular area by simply following a strategy of having a broad target and a cost leadership strategy. We could also have another company with a broad target and following a differentiation strategy, and they could also have a success in the marketplace. So his idea is to combine this target and the strategy. And that leads us to the next slide here, that we can combine options, means a broad target with a low cost leadership, and that is option number 1. So think back to what we talked about just a few minutes before, that we are now in a systematic way developing strategies for a company based upon the environmental analysis, and in this case, PASTEL. It could be Porter's 5 forces, it could be customer analysis, competitor analysis, etc. And based on that analysis, we might be able to develop a strategy called broad target with low cost leadership. What Porter would say is, he would say, okay, and now I'm going to take you back a bit to the slide number 4 here. If we look at the environment, we know that we have results from the analysis, PASTEL, Porter 5 forces, etc. So what Porter would say when we are standing in this box, he would say, are there anything in your analysis of the environment that tells you that you should go to have a broad perspective or target in the marketplace and maybe follow a differentiation strategy? Now, where would we find this kind of information? Well, remembering back to what strategic analysis is about the environment, it is about competitor analysis, for example. And if we take a look at the results from our competitor analysis, we may find that there are no competitors in the marketplace that is having a broad target. So that means there might be an opening. Imagine we are in the US, quite a huge market, and we have the different states, and we might find that there are no suppliers in the whole of the US known across the US, but we might just have specific suppliers in the different states. So that could indicate to us, this result from the analysis of competitors, that there might be an opening to have a very broad target to the whole market, and that means to go across all the different states and become a national brand. So that is one way to apply the results of this analysis that we have from our environment in developing a specific option. So it's not that we are just saying, okay, we will go for this broad target and course leadership. No, we have to go back and look into the environment and the analysis of the environment and say, what kind of information, what kind of data from our analysis supports that we may find it an option to go for a broad target with course leadership, or maybe a broad target with differentiation. And differentiation, for example, could also be rooted in the customer analysis. What are the customers' perceptions? Do they perceive the competitors in a specific way that makes an opening to us in the environment? So again, all these environment-based options, and now we'll go back to slide 17 here. These different options, broad target with a course leadership approach, is one option, yes, but we must be able to argue that this is an option, and we have to find the argument in the results, or the results of the external analysis. Otherwise, it's not really an option. That just makes it a claim that this is something that we would like to have. So the development of strategies, and thereby also how do we identify them, is based upon a specific or systematic approach, saying, are there any indications in our environmental analysis telling us that we should go for a broad target with a course leadership approach? And we could say yes, maybe no. But that is option number one. It also means that if we can be able to say that and can be able to make a decision whether it's a yes, maybe a no, to have a broad target with course leadership, we must understand and know our data from the external analysis. Otherwise, we cannot make that suggestion. And this is the idea about developing these strategies in a systematic way. So what Porter found was that you can go for a broad target with course leadership or with differentiation. Or you could go with a narrow target with course leadership or with differentiation. So the bottom line simply is, imagine Porter would stand next to us and he would ask us the question, okay guys, are there any things in your external analysis telling us that we should go for this option? And then we would have to argue, yes, no, maybe. And then he would say, okay, good. What about, are there anything indicating in your analysis that we should go for a broad target with differentiation? And we would have to find arguments based in the external analysis. And so he would ask questions about this and about this. And having done that, we would then have ideas about which of these options might be the best one. And we may also have a situation where we will say we would need to collect more information. Okay, let's move on to the next guy called Igor Ansoff. He has suggested that another way to look at the marketplace is kind of to look into what he calls market options. And it's very, very simple, these ideas of his. Namely, he says that when you're looking at your marketplace, and I'll try to illustrate this with this map here, when you're looking at your marketplace, and these are the different markets that you could focus at, then one point in developing a strategy for the future is simply to look at them and investigate them. And he suggests we look at both existing markets and new markets. That's probably quite okay, because if we are in a marketplace, then of course it makes a lot of sense figuring out, is it possible and is it worthwhile to develop this marketplace that we are in? And are there any markets outside the markets that we are operating in right now that is good and maybe could give us some profit potential? So that makes a lot of sense to investigate the ones that we have and new markets. Then he suggests that we have to look into our products as well. So these are his two major inputs to developing strategies: markets, existing ones and new markets, and the products that we are producing right now, both existing products and new product development. And here I just took this from, we had talked about Vestas a couple of times. I simply took the product portfolio from Vestas. This is what they produced. As you can see, they produce different kinds of wind turbines. And therefore, we should look into our existing products, which would be these. And maybe then say, okay, can we sell these products? And does it make sense for us to sell them in our existing markets? That's basically his question to us. And then we would also, of course, need to investigate, what about these products that we have here? Are there any indications that we could sell them in new markets? So what he's helping us with, Mr. Ansoff here, is to have a systematic approach of investigating markets and products. And that is what we know as the market options matrix. Let's try to see how he suggests us to do it. As you can see here, he uses this square where we have 4 different areas, and he says, okay, we have the product here, which is existing products. and then we have increasing technical innovation this way. And then down here, he will add our market, and up here we have existing markets, and then we would go down here indicating that we are entering new markets in this area here. So existing market, existing product leaves us with this area where we are operating right now. But he also says that if we have an existing market and selling existing products, it's not only a question about deciding that we in the future would like to do more here. We could also choose to go like this and simply withdraw our activities. That is also in a strategic context known as a HQ decision, a headquarter decision. And the reason it says like this here is that we are going to talk about corporate strategies later. For now, we would also say any business operating in a specific market with a specific product, they can choose to stay there or they can withdraw. Let's try to investigate these options that we have here. So the first thing, Ansoff called this the market penetration option. And again, please notice it's an option. That means it's not something we have to do, but the option could be to penetrate the market even further. So penetration in this case means to go further into, and this also indicates that it simply means our market share should be increasing. But in order to investigate if we could increase our market share in the existing market, then we would have to go back to our external analysis and investigate the data that we have about our customers, about the competitors, about the whole marketplace, and see, are there any data that indicate that it is a good idea to try and penetrate the market even further? Imagine for a moment that we have a company, we are, let's say again, Coca-Cola, and does it make sense if we are going to penetrate the Danish market even further? Now we have quite a high market share already. So do we gain anything from trying to get an even higher market share? It might make sense, but then we would have to have some cost-benefit analysis about what is going on and what are the costs of gaining a larger market share and what are the profits of gaining that extra market share. So again, it's an option to penetrate the market further, but we have to go back to our external analysis and the results of those and find arguments that support this strategy. Okay, now this is an option. As you remember, we had 4 options from Porter. That means this is option number 5 in our systematic approach to investigate the market and the different strategies that we can develop based on our market. So if we go down here with the same product and we go down here, then we also have an option called market development. Now to investigate that, again, we go back to our results from our market analysis, and we might have to investigate further, namely to figure out over here, let's say that we have been in this area before, in the New York area, then we may have to investigate and collect new data if we want to enter this area here, because otherwise we do not have any data to develop our strategy upon. So even before we start to do our external analysis, we may have thoughts about market development, and therefore we incorporate that thought about a possible strategy into our planning of collecting data, because then we collect data about these areas. Because then later on, when we have collected the data, then we can start analyzing the data, and we can make decisions about whether it makes sense to choose a strategy of market development. So that was market development, and then we have product development. We have existing markets, and if we develop our products over here, this direction, then we have a strategic option that we call product development. And that could make a lot of sense if we are in an existing market. Up here, if we look at Vestas, they have some of their smaller platforms, as they call it. They have small and big. It simply means that in the last many years, when they have developed their products, they have developed bigger and bigger wind turbines. And that means that they have also increased the technical innovation within their product. And that means that at their existing markets, they have been able to offer larger and larger wind turbines using new types of technology and also using technical innovation in order to make larger and larger wind turbines. So in this case, for example, Vestas has been originally supported by the Danish government simply because private people could buy wind turbines and be supported by the government, and that made a healthy situation in the present market, the Danish market. So they have been supported to develop their products in the existing market, and they have also, for many years ago, they started to develop different kinds of wind turbines. They call them platforms, different kinds of wind turbines, using new technology, increasing the technological innovation within the turbines. And that means they have constantly worked on product development, but with a focus on the Danish market. So they have been increasing this, they have been developing new products, and at a certain point of time, they also found out that these products that they have started to operate, and then of course, when they have developed them and they are selling them in the market, it becomes market penetration again. But then they started to figure out, okay, there are lots of other places in the world where they would like to have wind turbines. So then they started to sell their products in the world market, and that was market development. So this very small business in the start developed because the Danish state supported private people to buy this product. And then they developed new options, new products, new technologies that would improve the product, that would make the product more interesting to other countries as well. And then they could start to develop on a market basis. So Vestas has simply started out by having a good idea. They have penetrated the market the best they could, but if they would further, they would have to increase, and they did. They developed larger and larger turbines and the technology, and that made it possible for them to be competitive in Denmark, but also start to be competitive in the foreign market. So they have used these options quite well. But again, this is option number 5. If we count 4 from Porter, 5, 6, 7, and then we have number 8 here, which is about diversification. And diversification is about to do something that is quite different from what we are already doing. We'll get back to what diversification is when we are talking about corporate strategy. And then, of course, we can have diversification as being related or unrelated. Okay. So these were options based on Porter and based upon Ansoff. And then we have the expansion method matrix. And please just note that it's a way to structure possible geographic market opportunities and external links available to the company. And let's try to see what that simply means. It's about, it's a way to, here we have the inside the company and we have outside the company. So inside the company, we could have at a home market, we could have what we call internal development. And if we want to keep things to ourselves, but we want to go international, we could look into export, overseas manufacture, and that kind of stuff. And then we could also have someone outside our company to help us in our home market. If we do that, we could merge with someone, we could have some acquiring, we could have joint ventures, we could have alliances, and we could have the same going into an international context as well. So expansion method matrix is merely about understanding how to do things and are not really options, but you can talk about them as, you could say, options for expansion. Okay. So these were the environmental options. And remember, we based our decisions, the options based on our external environmental analysis. Now turning to the resource-based options, then this is a systematic way to develop strategies based upon the resource situation. And remembering back to one of the first slides is that we talked about value chain, resource-based view, and cost reduction. So we'll try to go through these. The first one, the value chain. We know this and we've seen it before, but what we are talking about here, what Porter suggests us, is that using the value chain for developing strategy, he simply has this more overall approach, saying that, are we really good at what we call upstream activities, or are we really good at downstream activities? So the idea is to investigate, are we really good at activities that here add value early in the value chain? And that could include low cost on raw materials, standardized products, process innovation, etc. So the question here is, Porter would say, okay, are we good, are you and your company, are you good at upstream activities? And then we would have to go back to our resource analysis and find arguments saying that, yes, we are extremely good at inbound logistics, we're extremely good at operations. So we are really good at upstream because this is where we find upstream activities. And then we could support our claim with analysis of the resources, saying that, for example, your own model, dear Porter, suggests us that in this case we have these tangible, intangible, and capability resources. And here we have these resources to build upon. And they actually create value in this and this way. And by that, we could say, okay, that means that we have quite a good upstream value creation. So maybe this is something we should build upon. Then he would ask us, what about downstream? Aren't you good at any downstream activities? Aren't you good at differentiating your products in the marketplace? Are you good at advertising? Can you create a brand, etc.? And then we would go back to our analysis, for example, from our fortified forces, and we will say, well, we have these outbound activities, we have marketing and sales, we have service, and our analysis of our resources in these areas tells us that we actually create no value here. We are not really good at selling. We primarily sell our products to customers who will pick them up themselves, and service is something we do if we are really put under pressure. So we're not really good at these activities here. So we might not be good at downstream activities. That doesn't mean that we may not have a good business, because if we are really good at upstream to source and to operate, that means our production, if we're really good at that, we can be really specified and both reach out for a target market or a narrow market or a broad market. So the question here is about upstream or downstream activities, and that is the way he would ask us to look into it. Yes. Then we have some what we call resource-based approaches. We have also talked about this in the analysis part, and Kay here would simply say, do you have any networks or relationships inside and outside that you can build upon and thereby take advantage of? What about your reputation? Do you have in the marketplace, do people have a favorable impression of you and your organization? And then how can you take advantage of that? Here, we would also say yes, or some of you might say, well, isn't that something that has to do with the environment? Yes, it is. But a reputation is something that the company owns. That means it's an intangible resource. So it is created in the marketplace because it's a favorable impression that people have. But it is something that is belonging to the company because it is the company's reputation. That's someone else's company. So in this case, it is a resource because it's an intangible resource. And then he also suggested to look into innovative capabilities. Then we have this idea about different kinds of competences. And when we look at these models, it's not really a model, it is simply a suggestion of how to look into competences. And we can have a single task competence. That is an individual's own knowledge and skills. And examples are craft skills, numerical ability, market analysis. It could also be a communication student who has a job at a company where we have a single task, and it is your specific knowledge and skills within analyzing and planning communication. That means it's your specific analysis skills and knowledge within communication. So the company might choose to build on that single task. It simply means that the company should ask themselves here, do we have single task competences in our company? And then they would have to look for single task. Now the point here is, if you don't know that it might make sense to ask and investigate single task, then you wouldn't investigate it. And that is the great idea about this competence suggestion, how to look at it. We have single task, group task, middle management, cross-functional, and function related. So the point here is, ask yourself, do we have middle management competences in our company? Investigate it and figure it out, and then we might be able to build upon it, and it may be an option to our company. Then we have some resource-based approaches. We have designing in cost reductions. Imagine that you are producing some product that takes a lot of manufacturing in your company, and you might have one machine who's the first machine that the product is being going through, and the machine is bending the product. Let's say it's something that needs to be bended, and then you have to stack all the products again and take it to the next machine. Imagine that you could ask your supplier to bend the products before they came into your factory floor. Of course, if the supplier were to bend the product, he might charge you $1 more for the product. But if you can save both labor time and machinery, that might be $3 per unit. Then you have in all saved $2. So that's the idea about designing in cost reductions. Then structured approach to cost reduction. It's about exploring the different options that the OMA have. It's about simply breaking down and understanding every single cost that we have. And then we have supplier relations. Of course, we could take a better look at our suppliers. And capacity. Imagine that you are able to produce pizza, and you have a capacity of 100 in your kitchen at home. That means that your kitchen has a high fixed cost. And if you can produce 100 pizza a day, but only produce 20, then of course, if you have to pay some rent for having your kitchen available, then that rent need to be placed on 1, 2, 3, 20 different pizza. That might add up to $10 per pizza. But if you could produce 100 pizza a day, then you can distribute the fixed cost you have on 1, 2, 3, up to 100 pizzas. So that means that the fixed cost per unit will be much lower if you are running close to your capacity. Another good way to look into it. And then we have these 3 different kinds of ways to analyze our resources. And I have made some extra slides for these, so we'll elaborate these 3 on the next slides here. We take economies of scale first. It's about unit costs may reduce as the size of the plant increase. It's not only about the plant increases, it's also simply a matter of production going up. So the idea is that you have the cost of producing 1 unit over here, and over here, this is the cost of producing 1 unit. Okay, as we can see, it's here. What is the cost of producing the 2nd unit? Well, it's a bit lower. It may not be in reality because there might be larger steps, but the idea is if you produce a lot down here, then simply because you can start to get larger discounts, get larger to your capacity utilization, then the unit cost will simply go down, because the more you produce, the more likely it is that you can take advantage of economies of scale, simply getting lower cost because you're producing a lot. Okay, this one, economies of scope. As it says here, it may be possible for different products to share some functional costs, services, etc. And one of the good things to look at here is the value chain. Because if you have different companies and a corporation that owns different companies, then all of these companies have a value chain. And then if you have here, let's say this is Vestas, this is Lego, this is Tesla. If we have these 3 companies, they all have their own value chain. In the value chain, they all buy office supplies. And if Vestas is buying office supplies with the supplier, they might have to pay this amount of money here. But if Vestas and Lego go together, then they might buy twice as much. And that might get the unit cost down because they get even larger discounts. So economies of scope is about taking advantage of having more companies, more SBUs, in order to reduce here and take a look at the value chain. What kind of activities can we support here in asking for better options? And the last one, the experience curve. Here, the idea is that a company becomes more experienced at production. Let's go back to your kitchen. You produce 1 pizza. The cost of it is, let's say, 20. And that goes with labor cost and the cost of the ingredients that you're using. Now, the labor cost is interesting here because the experience curve is about people being experienced at what they are doing, at producing. So when you have produced your first pizza, you have gained a little knowledge about how to do it. So the next pizza you produce, number 2, you might be able to do it a little bit faster than you did the first one. And since you get paid to produce, that means we have a salary. So when we are paying people to do the work, then if they can do the work faster, if they can produce a product faster, then they are only spending, let's say, 15 minutes instead of 20 minutes. So that means we are saving 5 minutes. But these 5 minutes, the operator can then spend these 5 minutes producing the next item. So that means the cost goes down. So when we have experience, it simply means when people get more experienced and the organization gets more experienced because they produce more and more, then the costs fall. But we are specifically focusing here on the labor cost that's going down. And the last slide. If we put in the market price, then imagine that you are entering a new market. And then you say, okay, my costs are right here, right now. And the market price in the market I want to enter is between these two lines here. And then on a strategic level, you can decide, well, I believe that when I start to produce more, I get more experience. You may also get large-scale advantages. And that means that on a strategic basis, even though you have a higher unit cost than the market price, then you can, on a strategic basis, decide, I believe I can push this down here and become competitive. So that's also one of the ideas about the market price in this way.